The CSS line height property behaves in a similar way to leading in print design. It allows us to control the spacing between lines in paragraphs, headings, and other text elements. Line height can also be used as a base to create consistent vertical rhythm and spacing throughout an entire project. In this episode, we'll look at the difference between line height and leading, using line height for vertical alignment, and using the value of line height to set up a site-wide default spacing. Leading is a typesetting term which describes the distance between the baselines in text. The term comes from the days of hand typesetting, when strips of lead were used to space out the blocks of type. When talking about leading, the space is always added below the line. Line height is a CSS property that controls the height of a line, where the spacing is equal above and below the text. If I have a paragraph with 1em or 16 pixels font size, and I have a line height of 24 pixels, there will be 4 pixels of space added above the text, and 4 pixels of space added below. The height of the line will be 4 plus 16 plus 4, which equals 24 pixels. This is the major difference between line height and leading. In CSS, the text is vertically centered within the line, and in print, the space is added beneath the line. We can use this knowledge of line height to create a crude form of vertical centering, something that's typically quite difficult to do in CSS. Let's take a look at an example. I want to create an image rollover effect and display a semi-transparent title with vertically centered text over the top of an image. I'll create a container and add a 400 by 400 image inside of it. I'll now add the title inside that with a single line of text. This overlay title can now be placed over the top of the image with position absolute, and then given a semi-transparent background. As I know the height of the image, 400 pixels, and therefore the height of the image container, I can use line height to vertically center the text within the box by setting it to 400 pixels. There's one small downside to this technique, as if the text is too long and wraps onto multiple lines, the height of each of those lines will be 400 pixels, and the text will overflow the box. For an alternative approach to vertical alignment, keep a lookout for episode 22. We've seen how line height can control the spacing of lines of text in a paragraph. I like to carefully pick this value and use it as the underlying foundation for most spacing throughout an entire site. I'll often set default font size and line height on the body element, which will then cascade down through all of my text elements. Line height can be specified in pixels, in em, in rems, in percentages, or can be left unitless. With unitless line height, which is my preference, all elements receive vertical spacing of their font size multiplied by my spacing factor. I often use 1.5 as my factor, but as it's predominantly set in one place, it's easy to change. If my default font size is 16 pixels, then all paragraphs will have a line height of 1.5 times 16, which is 24 pixels. If my default H1 font size is 2ems, then those will have an equivalent font size of 32 pixels and an equivalent line height of 48 pixels. I would continue to use this 1.5 factor throughout the rest of the site. I'd add 1.5 ems of margin beneath headings, paragraphs, lists, list items, and form inputs, for example. If I wanted a larger amount of space between elements, I'd double my 1.5 to 3em. If I wanted less space, perhaps for padding around buttons or form inputs, I might half it to 0.75em, or quarter it to 0.375. The aim of the game here is to keep the factor consistent throughout, regardless of whether you're multiplying it up to make things larger or dividing to make it smaller. With this consistent spacing set up, if I were now to change the default font size on the body, the relative spacing in and around each element would remain consistent too. Working out this spacing multiplier is probably one of the most important things to do at the start of a new project. If any specific elements need to be adjusted away from this magic factor, that's totally doable, but I think it's always smart to set a good solid foundation and then build upon that, rather than dialing everything in by eye each time where there's a risk of things not lining up or being inconsistent from page to page.